This is Concept E classes, and today we'll study Chapter 2 of Class 8 Social Science, Geography, Land, Soil, Water, Natural Vegetation and Wildlife Resource. So in the previous chapter we studied what is a resource. Anything that can be used to satisfy a need is called as a resource. And we studied the different types of resources: natural resources, human-made resources and human resources. So in this chapter we'll mainly deal with some of the natural resources. First we'll study about a land resource, then what all are the uses of land and how can we conserve land. Then we'll study about soil, what is a soil, how is soil formed, the factors of soil formation, the degradation of soil and some measures to conserve soil. Then we'll deal with water, how important is water as a renewable resource, the uses of water, the problems of water availability and how we can conserve water. And finally, we'll study about natural vegetation and wildlife, how important are plants and animals in the earth, the distribution of natural vegetation, how we can conserve natural vegetation and wildlife. So let's begin the chapter. So the first natural resource that we are going to study is land. Now land resource refers to the land available for utilization. It is a very important natural resource and it covers about 30% of the total area of the earth's surface, and all parts of this small percentage are not habitable. Now what do you mean by habitable? It is not suitable to live in. 90% of the world population, they occupy only on 30% of the land area, and the rest of the 70% of the land is either sparsely populated or uninhabited. Now the distribution or the uneven distribution of population is mainly due to the varied characteristics of the land and the climate. So let's see some of the areas which are normally sparsely populated or uninhabited. What do you mean by sparsely populated? It means they are small in number. So the areas which are sparsely populated or uninhabited are rugged topography, steep slopes of mountains, low-lying areas which are most prone to waterlogging, desert areas and thick forested areas. So these areas are not suitable to live in. Now the densely populated areas in the world are plains and river valley. They offer suitable land for agriculture. Now let's see how this land resource is utilized. Now land is used for different purposes such as agriculture, forestry, mining, building houses, roads and setting up industries, and this is commonly termed as land use. Now an example of land use is the Salzburg in Austria, and here we can notice that in how many ways the land have been used. Now the use of land is determined by physical factors such as topography, soil, the climate, minerals and the availability of water, and human factors such as population and technology. And these two are also the important determinants of land use pattern. So the use of the land can be determined by both physical factors and human factors. Now land can also be classified on the basis of ownership as private land and community land. Now private land is the land owned by the individual, and community land is the land owned by the community for common uses like the collection of fodder, the fruits, nuts or medicinal herbs. Now these community lands are also called as common property resources or CPR. But people and their demands are always increasing, but the availability of land is always limited. And the quality of land also differ from place to place. Hence, the people, they started using common lands to build up commercial areas, housing complexes in urban areas, and they started expanding the agricultural land in rural areas. See here we can see the change in land use over a period of time from a normal agriculture to an urbanized area. So because of all this expansion of agriculture and construction activities, some of the major threats that our environment face are land degradation, landslides, soil erosion, and soil desertification. So let's now see one of a case study of a landslide that happened in Himachal Pradesh. Now, what are landslides? Landslides are simply defined as a mass movement of rock, debris, or earth down a slope, and they often takes place in connection with earthquakes, floods, and volcanoes. And even if there is a heavy rainfall, there is a chance for landslides. So let's see the case study of a massive landslide that hit the Pangi village, which is near the Rekong PO in Kinnaur district of the Himachal Pradesh, and it damaged a 200-meter stretch of old Hindustan-Tibet Road National Highway 22. And this landslide was very vast that it caused intense damage to the road and the nearby villages. And because of this, certain mitigation mechanisms were adopted. Now, what do you mean by mitigation? It means it is certain actions for reducing the seriousness of landslides. And these techniques, they help us to understand what are the factors which cause landslides and how to manage them. So these are some of the mitigation techniques. Now let's see 2-3 techniques. The first one is hazard mapping to locate areas which are most likely to have landslides. Hence, such areas can be avoided for building settlements. Secondly, the construction of a retention wall. This wall, it helps to stop land from slipping. So this is an example of a retention wall. Thirdly, we could increase the vegetation cover to stop the landslide, because the plants, the root, they hold the soil together and it prevents landslides and soil erosion, etc. And the surface drainage control, it also works to control the movement of landslide along with rainwater and spring flows. So the surface drainage is mainly a diversion created to remove the excess water from the surface by means of natural channels or by construction drains and all. So these are some of the mitigation techniques that help us to understand the factors that causes landslides or how we could manage them. So we saw the major threats that our environment faces due to the degradation of land, and because of growing population and their demand, there is a destruction of forest cover and fertile land as well. Hence, our land should be conserved. So some of the methods which are used to conserve land resources are afforestation. Afforestation is actually the process of planting more and more trees or a stand of trees in an area where there was no previous cover. Then land reclamation. Land reclamation is actually a process of creating a new land from the sea or oceans or riverbeds or lake beds. So this method mainly involves simply filling the area with large amount of heavy rocks and cement, or filling it with clay until the desired height is reached, and that land is said to be reclaimed. Then the regulated use of chemical pesticides and fertilizers also helps in conserving the land resource. We know that this overuse of fertilizers that lead to soil acidification, thereby decreasing the organic matter of the soil. Hence, we should regulate the use of such chemicals. And finally, we should check on overgrazing. What do you mean by grazing? Grazing is like a pasture or a land where the animals, they feed on grass. Now, overgrazing occurs when the plants are exposed to intensive grazing for a long period of time without a sufficient recovery period. That is, it doesn't allow the plant to grow back, and the animals, they keep on feeding on the grass. Hence, this reduces the ground cover and it also enables soil erosion. So we should check on such overgrazing as well. So these are some of the methods which are used to conserve land resource. Now, the next natural resource that we are going to study is soil. The soil is a thin layer of grainy substance covering the surface of the earth. It is closely linked to land. Now, the landforms determines the type of soil. Now, what all are the landforms? Landforms are the mountains, plateaus, valleys, deserts, dunes, islands, rivers, beach. So these all determine the types of soil. Now, soil is made up of organic matter, minerals and weathered rocks found on the earth, and this happens through the process of weathering. Now, what is weathering? Weathering is a breaking up of exposed rocks by temperature changes, frost action, plants, animals, and human activity. So, in other words, we can say that the soil is formed from the parent rocks through the process of weathering and natural erosion. Now, the right mix of minerals and organic matter makes the soil fertile. Now, this is an image of a soil profile. That is, it is a vertical section of the soil. It consists of the topsoil, which is filled with humus and vegetation. It is a layer where the germination of seeds take place, and this layer contains microorganisms and organic matter. Now then we have the subsoil. The subsoil is present just below the topsoil, and it's quite harder than the topsoil. It consists of sand, silt and clay. Then we have the weathered rock. Now this is the first step in soil development. It is modified by the activity of soil organisms, and finally we have the parent rock. Now the parent rock is also called as bedrock, and it has no organic matter, and it is made up of solid rocks. So we saw the profile of a soil and how soil is formed. It is formed from a parent rock through weathering and natural erosion. So now let's see the factors of soil formation. So the major factors of soil formation are the nature of the parent rock, the climatic factors, topography, the role of living organisms and time. And each of these factors, they differ from place to place. So let's see these factors briefly. First one is a parent rock. The parent rock determines the color, the texture, the chemical properties, the mineral content and the permeability of the soil. The second factor is the climate. The temperature, the rainfall, they influence the rate of weathering and humus. That is, if it is a cold climate, the process of weathering is slow. If it is hot, there is moisture content, and hence the rate of weathering is high. Hence the climate is also a factor of soil formation. Now the next factor is topography. Altitude and slope, they determine the accumulation of soil. Then the next factor is the living organisms, flora, fauna and microorganisms. For example, all these living organisms, they die, and the bacteria and fungi, they break down these dead materials into humus, which also affects the formation of soil. And finally, time. Time determines the thickness of a soil profile. It takes hundreds of years to make just 1 centimeter of soil. So these are the major factors of soil formation, and all these differ from place to place. So now let's see what are the major threats to soil. Soil erosion and depletion are the major threats to soil. And both human and natural factors can lead to the degradation of soil. So let's see some of the factors which lead to soil degradation. The first one is deforestation. Deforestation means it is the removal of trees for urban use or for agriculture purposes, and that leads to soil degradation. Overgrazing. We already studied about overgrazing in the previous slide. Then overuse of chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And because of this also we studied that there is a soil acidification which leads to the decline of the organic matter in the soil. Then rainwash. Rainwash is the washing away of soil and other loose materials by the rain. And finally, landslides and flood. These all are the factors which lead to soil degradation. Hence, it is important to conserve the soil. So, some methods of soil conservation are mulching, contour barriers, rock dam, terrace farming, intercropping, contour ploughing and shelter wells. Now, let's discuss each of these methods briefly. So, the first one is mulching. The bare ground between the plants is covered with a layer of organic matter like straw. It helps to retain soil moisture, and this process is called as mulching. So mulching is actually a covering of a straw or a compost between the plants in order to prevent the excessive evaporation or soil erosion, and also to enrich the soil, inhibit the weed growth, and it also helps to retain the soil moisture. Now let's see what are contour barriers. Stones, grass and soil are used to build barriers along the contours. So here contours means an outline or a shape, and the contour barriers are made up of stones or grass or soil in order to stop the flowing water from the slope. And trenches are also made in front of the barriers to collect water. So this is the contour barrier and this is the trench. Trench is actually a deep channel or a pit, and it's actually made to collect the water flowing down from the slopes. This is a real-time image of a contour barrier, and this is the trench. Now let's see what are rock dams. Rocks are piled up to slow down the flow of water. So rock dams are usually small barriers or dams constructed of stones or sometimes sand or gravel across the drainage way. So its main purpose is to reduce erosion in a drainage channel. Then we have terrace farming. The broad, flat steps or terraces are made on the steep slopes so that the flat surfaces are available to grow crops. So this is called as terrace farming. It is a method of growing crops on the sides of the hills or a mountain, and that flat surfaces are available to grow crops. Terrace farming reduces surface runoff as well as soil erosion. What are intercropping? Intercropping is actually the process of cultivation of two or more crops simultaneously in alternate rows, and they are sown at different types to protect the soil from rainwash, and they also help in the diversity and the stability of the field. Contour ploughing. Ploughing parallel to the contours of the hill slope to form a natural barrier for the water to flow down the slope is called as contour ploughing. So contour ploughing is actually the ploughing done along the contours in order to minimize the soil erosion. Now let's see what are shelter belts. The shelter belts are actually a line of trees planted to protect an area, especially a field of crops, from fierce weather or from heavy wind. So these are some of the methods of soil conservation. Now let's see the next natural resource, which is water. Water is a very important renewable natural resource. 3/4 of the earth's surface is covered with water. We already studied that 70% of the earth is covered with water, and hence it is appropriate to call earth as a water planet. The oceans, they cover 2/3 of the earth's surface, and they support a rich variety of plants and animals' life. And the ocean water is saline, hence it is not fit for human consumption. Now the fresh water, it accounts for only 2.7%, and out of this 70% occurs as ice sheet and glaciers in Antarctica, Greenland and mountain regions, and they are inaccessible as well. And only 1% of the fresh water is available and fit for human use, and it is found as groundwater or as surface water in rivers, lakes, or as water vapor in the atmosphere. Hence, fresh water is the most precious substance. Now, water can neither be added nor subtracted from the earth. Its total volume always remains a constant. Its abundance may vary, but its volume remains a constant. So in order to understand that, let's understand this water cycle. So here, what happens here is that we have water bodies, and the water in the seas and rivers, they evaporate because of the heat of the sun, and that process is called as evaporation. And the plants, they also give out a large amount of water through transpiration, and the water vapor, they rises up and they condense on the dust particle to form clouds. That process is called as condensation. Now the water which is stored inside the cloud, they reach the surface of the earth or the ground in the form of rain, hail or snow, and that process is called as precipitation. And the water that flows off the surface as surface runoff join the low-lying water bodies, and the process continues. So in this manner the water is circulated in the environment. So water cycle, it describes the continuous movement of water within the earth and the atmosphere, and this constant and never-ending circulation of water. In nature is termed as water cycle. Now let's see what are the uses of this water resource. Humans use water not only for drinking and washing but also for agriculture purposes, industrial uses and generating electricity through reservoirs or dams. Now, because of this extensive use by humans, there is a shortage of water as well. So some of the factors which lead to the shortage or supply of fresh water are the increasing population. More is the number of people, more will be the demand of water. The rising demands for food and cash crops, the increasing urbanization, the rising standards of living, all this leads to the drying up of water resources as well as water pollution. So problems of water availability. There is a scarcity of water in many regions of the earth. Most of Africa, West Asia, South Asia, parts of Western USA, Mexico, parts of South America, entire Australia are facing shortage in the fresh water supply. Now, the shortage of water may be due to the variation in seasonal or annual precipitation. We know that the precipitation varies globally over time. It rains at certain parts, but the quantity would be different. In desert, they have limited rainfall. In areas near to the equator, they have heavy rainfall. So this variation in this annual precipitation leads to water shortage. Then is over exploitation. Now, over-exploitation of any resource such as water, it leads to the destruction of that resource. Over-exploitation means the overuse of water. Then the contamination of water sources. So contamination means it is a discharge of industrial waste, marine dumping, sewage waste. All this contaminate the water. So these all may lead to water shortage. So access to clean and adequate water is a major problem. Hence, we have to conserve this water resource. So even though water is a renewable resource, its overuse and pollution make it unfit to use. So the major contaminants or pollutants of water are the discharge of treated or partially treated sewage, agriculture chemicals, or the industrial effluents in the water bodies. These industrial contaminants or this major contaminants, they pollute the water with nitrates, metals and pesticides. And most of these chemicals, they are non-biodegradable and they reach the human body through water. Hence, the water pollution should be controlled by treating these pollutants before releasing them into water bodies. So how can we conserve water and control water pollution? Let's see. Forest and other vegetation cover, they slow the surface runoff and replenish the underground water. So the vegetation cover, it helps to slow the water movement, reducing the soil erosion, which in turn leads to less pollutants getting into the waterways. Water harvesting is also another method to save the surface runoff. So water harvesting is mainly the collection and storage of rainwater in surface tanks rather than allowing it to run off. The canals which are used for irrigating fields should be properly lined. So the canal lining is a process of reducing the leakage of irrigation water by adding a waterproof layer to the edges of the trencher. So by using this canal lining, the water wastage is minimized. The sprinklers, they also irrigate the area by checking the water losses through seepage and evaporation. In dry regions with high rates of evaporation, drip or trickle irrigation is used. So drip irrigation is an irrigation system that saves water and nutrients by allowing water to drip slowly onto the roots of the plants. So in this method, we could conserve water and control water pollution. So the last natural resource that we're going to study is natural vegetation and wildlife. Now, natural vegetation refers to the plant community which have grown naturally without any human aid and has been left undisturbed by humans for a long period of time. And wildlife refers to the animal species along with the organisms that grow and live in the wild. Now, the narrow zone of contact between the lithosphere, the hydrosphere and the atmosphere, where the natural vegetation and wildlife exist is called as the biosphere. And this life supporting system in the biosphere where the living beings are interrelated and interdependent on each other for survival is known as the ecosystem. Vegetation and wildlife are very valuable resources. So we understood the natural vegetation refers to the plant community. So now let's see some of the uses of this resource. Plants provide us with timber, they give shelter to the animals, they produce us oxygen to breathe, they protect soil for growing crops, they act as shelter belts, they help in the storage of underground water, they give us fruits, nuts, latex, turpentine oil, gum, medicinal plants and also paper. Now the wildlife mainly includes animals, birds, insects as well as aquatic life. So now let's see some of the uses of wildlife. Animals provides us with milk, meat, hides and wools. Insects like bees, they provide us with honey. They help in the pollination of flowers. They also play as decomposers in the ecosystem. Some insects like termites, cockroach, they all eat the dead matters. Hence, they also act as decomposers in the ecosystem. The birds, they feed on the insects and they act as decomposers as well. Vultures, they feed on dead livestock and hence they are called as scavengers and they are considered as a vital cleanser of the environment. So animals, whether they are big or small, all are integral to maintain the balance in the ecosystem. Now let's study the distribution of natural vegetation. The growth of vegetation mainly depends on the temperature and moisture. The major vegetation types of the world are grouped as forest, grasslands, scrubs and tundra. So let's discuss briefly each of these types. The first one is forest. In areas of heavy rainfall, huge trees may thrive. So forests are thus associated with the areas having high rainfall or abundant water supply. As the amount of moisture decreases, the size of the trees and the density also reduces. There are different types of forests like evergreen forest, deciduous forest, coniferous forest, etc. Now let's see what are grasslands. Short stunted trees and grasses. They grow in regions of moderate rainfall and they form the grasslands of the world. There are different types of grasslands as well, like temperate grasslands, tropical grasslands, also called as savanna, etc. Now the next vegetation type is the scrubs. Thorny shrubs and scrubs, they grow in dry areas of low rainfall. They have deep roots and leaves with thorny and waxy surface which reduces the loss of moisture through transpiration. So this is an example of a scrub type vegetation. Now let's see what is the tundra vegetation type. The tundra vegetation of cold polar regions comprises of mosses and lichens. So this is the vegetation which receives low amount of precipitation, making it similar to that of a desert type of vegetation. So this is how the vegetation is distributed. So nowadays, to feed the growing numbers, large areas of forest have been cleared to grow crops, and the forest covers all over the world is vanishing rapidly. Hence, there is an urgent need to conserve this valuable resource. The conservation of natural vegetation and wildlife. So forests are our wealth. Plants give shelter to the animals and they maintain the ecosystem. Now changes of the climate and human interferences can cause the loss of natural habitat for plants and animals. So changes of climate can be simplified in a simpler way like global warming. It is the greatest cause of species extinction. Similarly, human interferences. We can say that now the population is increasing, hence more and more lands have been transformed. So this human interferences can also cause loss of natural habitat for the plants as well as animals. And many species, they are becoming vulnerable, endangered and even extinct. So it is necessary to conserve a natural vegetation and wildlife. So there are certain human and natural factors which accelerate the process of extinction of natural vegetation and wildlife. They are deforestation, soil erosion, constructional activities, forest fires, tsunamis, and landslides. Poaching. It also results in the sharp decline in the number of particular species. What do you mean by poaching? Poaching is defined as the illegal hunting of animals. The animals are mainly poached for the collection of an illegal trade of hides, skins, nails, teeth, horns, as well as feathers. So, some of these animals are tigers, lion, elephant, deer, black buck, crocodile, rhinoceros, snowbird, ostrich, and peacock. So, now let's see how we can conserve these resources. We have national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and biosphere reserves in order to protect our natural vegetation and wildlife. So, these are actually protected areas made by the government to protect wild plants and animals and their habitats. Conservation of creeks, lakes, and wetlands also save the precious resource from depletion. So these wetlands all they provide a habitat to animals, plants, as well as a wide diversity of life. So by conserving these, we could also preserve and conserve the natural resources. Then awareness programs like social forestry and Vana Mahotsav should be encouraged. Now social forestry is a program which is meant for the protection of forest and afforestation of barren land with the purpose of helping environment. And Vana Mahotsav is a program among it is actually a tree plantation ceremony which is mainly meant to give an awareness to the general public for the need of growing trees and preserving them. Many countries have even passed laws against the trade as well as killing of birds and animals. In India, killing lions, tigers, deers, great Indian bustards, and peacock is illegal. And an international convention called as the CITES has been established that lists several species of animals and birds in which the trade is prohibited. Now, CITES is actually a convention on international trade in endangered species of wild flora and fauna. It is an international agreement between governments. So this aims to ensure that the international trade in specimens of wild animals does not threaten their survival. Some of the examples of such species are bears, dolphins, cacti, corals, orchids, and aloes. Hence, conservation of plants and animals is an ethical duty of every citizen. So that's all for this chapter. Tune in soon for the next session. Thank you so much. May God bless you all. Take care and bye bye.